As tensions rise in the South China Sea, a group of scientists early this year conducted the first marine scientific research in the case of Pag-asa Island. What did they find and how do these expeditions contribute to the protection and utilization of resources in the West Philippine Sea? Hello, I'm Iya Gozum and you're watching Rappler Talk. With us today is Dr. Jonathan Anticamara, professor at UP Institute of Biology and lead of the Marine Research Team in Pag-asa case. Thanks for joining us today, Prof.
Thank you. Hello.
Thank you.
Good day.
In your recent report, Prof, you described the Pag-asa case to be in a degraded state. Could you walk us through the salient findings of your research and what are the specific issues that you found that led you to this conclusion?
So what we did, we conducted 2-day underwater surveys wherein we look at the number of corals, the size of corals by using a standardized transect. We call this transect line. So it's a kind of sampling wherein you swim or you dive a particular area and then you photograph and you count the number of corals, the fish, and then you estimate their size. And so what we found is that for Pag-asa Island itself and the Pag-asa case, 1, 2, 3, 4, the data that we have and the images that I saw, the videos, and then the underwater scenarios that I saw is that most of the corals that are found underwater are now small, and there are a few species, so per unit area, and many of the large corals, used to be large corals, are now dead, covered in algae. So these are the basis for my conclusion that the coral reef itself is being degraded. And in addition, the fish that we surveyed, many of them are also few in number, so the abundance is low. And then the number of species also very low, very few species of fish. And many of them are also small in sizes. So across the case and across the entire Pag-asa Island itself that we surveyed, many of the fish are small. So this is all of this kind of information when taken together and compared to my previous surveys of reefs around the Philippines, made me conclude that Pag-asa and the Pag-asa case are now in a degraded state. No?
But sir, this is not what you were expecting in the beginning of this research, no? Because the Pag-asa case are very far from the mainland. So you were kind of expecting in the beginning na healthy pa yung ecosystem.
So as I said, since around 2010, and in fact earlier than that, around 1997, I've been around the Philippines doing systematic survey, systematic sampling of coral reefs from Apari all the way to Tawi-Tawi, except the Calayan Island Group and West Philippine Sea. So what I saw all throughout the Philippines in many of the municipalities that I went from north to south and in the central Philippines, many of the reefs are suffering decline and degradation, and most of this are attributed to a combination of the impacts of climate, but mainly also overfishing, because there's a lot of fishing activities. Like for example, if you go to Subic, you can see hundreds and hundreds of boats. If you go to Albay or Bicol, to go to Bohol, many islands in Bohol, thousands of fishers. So when I was invited to go to Pag-asa, my expectation is that it will be healthier because as far as I know, there are a few residents, and in fact, when we got there, there are really few fishing boats, and also there's really no market for like a commercial trade of fish. Most of the fishing that's going on, at least within the island, are for consumption and maybe a few. So I thought that because of that level of exploitation, maybe at least Pag-asa and the Pag-asa case will have more fish, big fish, like I was expecting sea sharks or, but not really none of those.
So was it a shock, sir, when you saw the situation in the case?
Yeah, a little bit because of that. You know, when you fly from Palawan all the way to Pag-asa, you pass through really many beautiful islands and cays in particular, not a lot of them exposed. And so you don't see a lot of fishing boats, right? There are fishing boats that are Chinese, Vietnamese, and Filipino fishing vessels, but not a lot. So you really have this expectation that maybe, this is a good
Right.
place.
And you also said in your report that you saw dead coral rubble piled on live colonies in the cay right? How does that affect the ecosystem, having those rubble piled on the colonies?
So, in the video that I showed during the forum, the rubble themselves, rubble are the fragments or dead pieces of corals. So when they die, they get broken, and they're piled on top of the live, large colonies of corals. So I think that to answer your question, the direct impact of rubble on top of corals is that it will kill these corals. They won't be able to survive. So I think that's the main direct impact of the rubble on the corals themselves.
Right. So, sir, just to give context to our viewers, on the extent of the damage, for them to appreciate what really happens, what exactly do we lose when coral reefs are damaged, and how long will it take them to grow back?
So, many corals are very small animals, right? And the way they grow themselves, they kind of clone or they just copy themselves, right? So that would take a very long time. Like a coral the size of our head, depending on species, can sometimes be 40 years old, 50. So corals that are quite big, like the size of this table, might be like 100 years.
Right.
So that's the time it takes to grow corals. But the branching corals, because I've been monitoring the growth of branching corals, they can be fast. Like size of this table, maybe about 5 years or 10 years, something like that. But many of these massive corals that we see in Pag-asa, the ones that are left alive right now, I think would take a very, very long time to grow, right? So,
Sir, were you able to gauge from your research kung gaano ka-recent yung damage na nangyari dun sa coral reef sa case ng Pag-asa?
Okay, so there are two things. So the ones that are underwater from let's say around 7 meters deep to around 20 meters deep, away from the pile of rubble itself. I think those dead corals have been dead for some time, for a long time. I can't tell exactly the time frame, but given that many of those big corals are dead, and many of them, and the ocean floor is now covered with many algae, and for not only Pag-asa Island itself, but for the cays themselves. So I think that happened for a very long period, maybe like, I don't know, maybe several years already. That's ongoing. And because also the algae are now brown and black, usually when the corals die recently, the algae that would cover it will be green, and the corals will be partially white. But most of these dead coral are now either black or gray. So for me, that would indicate that they have been dead for quite some time. But for those corals that have been impacted by the pile of rubble, I don't know the time frame, but I know that the pile of rubble are very white without algae themselves. And I look around, and all of them are very white without algae. So it might be very recent. For me, that's an indication, because otherwise, anything that's, at least those that are partially underwater, the part of the rubble pile that's underwater, if they have been there for some time, they should be covered in some forms of algae. And my experience with those that are recently dead, like the Yolanda, in a matter of days, the corals, once underwater, will be covered in algae, and in a week's time it will be changing in color.
Okay.
So yeah.
So, Prof, can you share what's the timeline of the research? When did it start? When the government tapped your group to do the research? And how did you prepare, keeping in mind the possible harassment from China?
So the invitation was from the Bureau of Fisheries, signed by the director. I got it 8 March, but I was phoned a week before that they are asking me if I'm interested to join a marine research expedition in Pag-asa, and of course I said yes. But I think the signing of the document took some time. And so I got it March 8th, and then I have to apply for permits from UP so that I'll be allowed to go. So that took like another week. But we had a briefing before our flight. Our flight was 18, our flight to Palawan. Before that, we were briefed by the BIFAR, the DNR, and the other agencies involved in the like the PCG in the security, in terms of the security, because I was also asking, if I go, we know the news are full of like China vessels harassing Filipino vessels. So they kind of explained that it's expected that there will be some form of tailing and maneuvering around our vessels. But usually our vessels are very good at kind of evading. So they kind of assure that nothing's terrible gonna happen. But we cannot expect that China will do nothing. China will do something. So that's it. And then we arrived 18, and then I actually went immediately to Pag-asa on the 18th on the first flight. And then I did the first survey of Pag-asa Island itself on the 19th. And then the case 2 on the 20th. We had a rest day on the 21 because the weather is really bad.
Yeah.
And then we continued with the second day of survey on the 22nd. And then another rest day on Saturday, and then we got back here on a Sunday.
And also, you shared earlier, sir, you were able to dive in Pag-asa case 2 and 3.
Yeah,
right?
so because we had a very limited amount of time, considering the safety and the Chinese maneuvers that we have to do, the research itinerary is very, very rigid and limited. So we have to divide ourselves. The entire team was composed of 8 members, 6 from the various departments of BFAR, and I have my assistant with me. So we divided ourselves into 2 teams, 4 members each, and I was part of the team that surveyed Pag-asa K2 on day 1, and then I went to Pag-asa K3 on day 2. But then after that day 2 survey of Pag-asa K3, I also went to Pag-asa K1. So I wasn't able to see Pag-asa K4. But I got hold of all the data from the survey, and I'm still analyzing a few of them because it takes some time to identify the many species. Yeah.
Prof, can you describe the experience of witnessing this parang whole of government approach into this kind of research? Is this something that you encounter a lot, or is this like a unique experience for you as a scientist?
No, in most places in the Philippines, you always deal with both either BFAR, DNR, so usually represented by the MINRO and the MAO, so the Municipal Agriculture Officer or the Municipal Environmental Officer. So this is typical for this kind of collaboration or co-management among the agencies at local government is common. But usually, I've rarely encountered, I've been to like Tawi-Tawi and some kind of not very easy place, but I usually don't have to deal with like the Coast Guards, all the many other agencies that are involved in the security. Usually it's just the LGU level, but I think Pag-asa is different because of the Chinese tension. So there's way more agencies that are involved every time I think you do something in places like Pag-asa or the West Philippine Sea. So that's the nature of the thing.
Yeah, on that note, sir, I'm curious, how are the tensions and Philippines' newfound assertiveness affecting research? Are these making research easier, the entry into the area? Are you being given enough resources?
I think that it definitely is very challenging compared to when you go to non-contested area. Like if you go to Batangas or you go to I don't know, Bicol, it's a completely different story. Usually when we do our research, we start 7 a.m., we end at 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. and we just swim the entire day. Here, I felt like I'm very restricted and I have to focus really on what I need to do. And so that in that sense, it's very, very different, I think. Yeah. So because you have to ensure like safety and like for example on day 2 when something terrible happened, the helicopter went down very low. We have to abort, so I cannot continue with the rest of the things I need to do. So something like that.
There are additional external factors, right, that would impede research work that you're not used to in
many other places in the Philippines.
Right. But beyond the territorial dispute, why do you think it's important to take care and study the area?
I'd like to see the West Philippine Sea, the Calayan Island group as really a part of our national agenda for coral reef management. So it's not an isolated, I don't treat it as an isolated case. When I look at it, the reason why I'm interested in it, because I want to see the entire picture of the coral reefs in the Philippines, and that's the missing piece for me. And so going back to your question, why it's important, because all coral reefs in the Philippines, if you look around the entire Philippines, we are really small islands in the middle of the Pacific.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think many Filipinos forget, because usually we're just inside buildings, right?
Yeah.
But we are in the middle of Pacific. We're surrounded by ocean, and many Filipinos actually live in the coastal area, where their access to food, income, livelihood is really the coral reef. That's their main source. And many places all throughout the Philippines, from Apari all the way to Tawi-Tawi. So I think for me, the coral reefs are first the most diverse ecosystem on the entire planet. And second, it's the most productive in terms of what the Filipino needs in terms of food, income, livelihood, and cultural activities like leisure. Most Filipinos go to the coastal areas. They usually swim near coral reefs. So I think if we lose the coral reefs, there's a lot of suffering from those people who have no other means to support themselves but the coral reef. So I think that's, for me, the West Philippine Sea and how it probably interacts with the rest of the coral reefs in the Philippines, how the entire ecosystem function in relation to the, let's say, the coral reefs of Palawan. I think these are important questions we need to figure out so that we can ensure that the coral reefs of the entire Philippines and the West Philippine Sea are protected for the indefinite future that we need them.
Yeah. So speaking of looking at the bigger picture of coral reefs in Philippine waters, how well do we actually know the resources in the West Philippine Sea? And do we have like a baseline on how much environmental damage in the West Philippine Sea have been incurred?
I can't really speak like for example, for Pag-asa, because I cannot find like in terms of number of corals, number of species, number of fish species. There's not a lot of past literature or data set that I can access that tells me this is. But because I did a national survey and I wrote about the state of the fisheries of the Philippines at the national scale, what's happened to the fisheries. I also wrote about the status of underwater at the national scale. So I think that overall, the trends that we now seeing actually in Pag-asa, which was initially surprising to me, is actually fits the picture of the entire country, that the coral reefs and the coastal ecosystems and marine ecosystems of the Philippines are overexploited. And we need more intensive and serious and effective management to really recover, rebuild areas like Pag-asa and other areas where we are now at a situation that it's no longer productive. I think the focus should be for the Filipinos to develop methods to recover and rebuild like the fisheries and the corals themselves. So I think that should be the focus for me.
Sir, maybe just a quick maybe you can explain how coral reef damage could affect food security.
It's very easy to some extent. If you look at any ecosystems underwater in the Philippines, so coral reef, seagrass, mangroves, and sandy areas or rocky areas, the corals are the most productive. What we mean is that there's so many species. Usually there's so many individual of fish. You can find invertebrates like shells, sea cucumbers, many taxa that are not found anywhere else, or many organisms that are not found anywhere else are found in the coral reefs. But they depend on the corals as habitat. So the fish in particular, many fish, the corals are their food and their house. So when the corals collapse, they lose their house, they lose their food, many of these fish will die, disappear. They just cannot survive. And that's the same for many invertebrates, like many shells, many kind of worms, etc. Without the corals, they will just disappear. So that's the kind of the domino effect, and that's the amazing role, the function of the coral. It's kind of like the house that everybody lives, and once you dismantle the house, everybody just kind of disappear. But it's not only a house; it's also a food source for many species. So that's the impact to this species. So once the fish lost their house, their food, the small fish disappear first, and if the small fish disappear, then the big fish will also have to disappear because they have no food. So this will impact now the fisheries, because most of us would like to eat big fish, but then where are the big fish gonna be from? So these are kind of a series of events that's kind of unfortunate, because once the corals die, the entire ecosystem collapse, and then the people who depend on those services, benefits that's derived from corals like fish, food, etc., income, tourism, all of this will slowly disappear.
Right.
And so that's where we are now.
Yeah. So, sir, going back to on preservation, lawmakers in Congress are proposing that 3 nautical miles of the Kalayaan Island Group and the Scarborough Shoal be declared a marine protected area. If this gets approved by the president, how do you think will this affect the conservation of resources and the research work that you're doing?
That will be a really great news, because many of the protected areas in the Philippines are really small. And so when we talk about management and conservation, what we really need in the Philippines now is something at the level of the ecosystem. So not just individual species or organism, but making sure that the ecosystem like coral reefs function well and are productive. And to do that, to be able to achieve effective ecosystem conservation or management, we need large-scale management. So if they do that for the Pag-asa, for the West Philippine Sea, that will be something that we can really be proud of. And then we hope that we can design it well, and then it can really change the trajectory of the future trajectory of the biodiversity, and then the benefits that the people get from the coral reef. So I think that will be a really good move, and I would highly support such a move.
I think a lot of scientists would support that kind of move. But just a last question from me. From a scientist's perspective, what do you think Filipinos should know about the West Philippine Sea?
I think for me, when I was there and looking at Pag-asa, and then just looking beyond, like a few kilometers away, you see all these Chinese vessels and the Chinese militia. I think for me, there are 2 things for me. So one is for the Filipinos to recognize that that it's not your typical situation, right? That there's already that tension, and then they're already there, and they built the islands already, so many islands within our territory. So that's one thing. But the other thing also is that we as Filipinos, we have the responsibility to take care of all the resources within this area, the marine biodiversity, because none of this biodiversity, these different kinds of life, are found in many other places in the planet. It's only in the Philippines. So I think that my message also to the Filipinos is that these are really important things, but we are the ones responsible for this. So on top of the political tensions, on top of the fact that we need to support many Filipinos and growing population, and therefore exploitation, and we need to balance that with the needs of the ecosystem. I think that we need to just tell ourselves really that we should be responsible, and we should take care of these resources, and nobody else will take care of these resources, the Filipinos themselves.
Right.
So I think that's something that I hope the Filipinos will see as well.
Yeah. I think a lot of things in these kinds of conversations, that we have the responsibility to protect these resources, kind of gloss over that. Right?
Because sometimes the focus really, I think, at least in the news, is really the tension, and then of course people scared with tension, or a lot of
Right.
Right. I think that at the end is that really this is our territory, and then these are our resources, and nobody else will take care of it. I think it's just the Filipinos.
Right. We've been speaking with Dr. Jonathan Anticamara, professor at UP Institute of Biology. For more news and updates on biodiversity and natural resources, join the Environment and Science Room of the Rappler Communities app. You can download the Rappler Communities app on your mobile. It is available on iOS and Android. Just scan the QR codes on your screens. You can also access it via desktop at communities.rappler.com. Again, I'm Iya Gozum. Thanks for tuning in.